The ship slid out of the darkness between the stars. One moment there was only the empty black. The next, the Ikozan scout ship Starlight Seeker was there. It was a quiet arrival. There was no loud noise, no flash of bright light. It just appeared, hanging in the silent space near its destination. On the bridge, Captain Min stood up from his chair. He was a serious man with a calm face. He walked slowly to the large view screen at the front of the room. His hands were held tightly behind his back. He had been the leader of this ship for a long time. He had seen many strange and wonderful things in his travels, but he had never seen anything like this. The planet below them was Earth, the ancient home of humanity. The stories about this place were famous among the stars. They were stories of a loud, violent, and powerful species, a species that filled the sky with ships and the air with noise, a species that in the end turned its power on itself. The stories said the humans fought a great war, a war that poisoned their world, a war that left the surface a burned and radioactive ruin, a grave for a dead empire. But the planet below Captain Min was not a ruin. It was beautiful. It was a perfect sphere of deep blue oceans and swirls of white cloud. Great land masses were covered in lush green. There were no brown scars of pollution, no gray patches of dead cities. It looked peaceful. It looked clean. It looked empty. "This is not possible," a voice said softly next to him. Min did not turn. He knew it was Gia, his chief scientist. She was a smart woman, always curious. Her eyes were wide as she stared at the screen. Her data tablet was hanging loosely from her hand, forgotten. "The scans confirm it," Gia said, her voice still a whisper. "The atmosphere is stable. Nitrogen-oxygen mix. Perfectly breathable. The radiation levels are normal. More than normal. They are ideal." She finally looked at Min. "Captain, this planet is not dead. It is healthier than our own homeworld." A low murmur spread across the bridge. The other crew members shifted in their seats. They felt a deep unease. They were Ikozan. 1,000 years ago, their people were nobody. They were simple traders and farmers. They lived on the edge of human space. When the first signs of the Great Human War began, the Ikozan did not stay to watch. They ran. They gathered their few ships and fled into the dark, hoping to find a new home far away from the coming fire. They survived. They built a new civilization, and now, a millennium later, they had returned. This expedition was meant to be a simple mission. They were here to pick through the bones of the giant. They hoped to find lost human technology, a working power core, a fragment of a data drive. Even a simple tool could change their society. They came as scavengers to a garbage heap, but the garbage heap was a paradise. "Life signs?" Min asked, his voice steady. Gia tapped on her tablet. "Massive. The entire biosphere is thriving. Plant and animal life everywhere, but no artificial signatures, no energy readings, no cities, no communication signals, nothing. It's just wild." Min nodded slowly. That was the source of the unease, the silence. A world this alive should have a voice. It should have the hum of machines, the buzz of power lines, the whisper of data streams. But there was nothing. Only the deep, profound silence of a world without a master. "Prepare the landing team," Min ordered. "We will go down to the primary target zone. The place the old charts call Sol." The orders were given. The crew moved with a quiet efficiency, but their movements were stiff. Their eyes kept drifting back to the view screen, to the beautiful, silent, and terrifying planet below. Later, in the ship's mess hall, the mood was tense. The security team, led by Officer Tay, was checking their equipment. Tay was a practical man. He believed in what he could see and touch. A beautiful planet was just a planet. A silent one was probably a safe one. "I do not like this," Gia said, sitting across from Min at a small table. She stirred a cup of tea she had not drunk. "This is wrong. The historical data is very clear. The atmospheric toxins alone should have taken 100,000 years to break down. The radiation should have lasted even longer. This is not natural. Perhaps the humans found a way to clean it up before they died out," Min suggested, though he did not believe it. "And then they just left?" Gia shook her head. "Why would they abandon a perfectly healed world? Why is there not a single soul down there? Not a settlement, not an outpost, not even a ruin? Captain, the buildings are gone. The cities are just gone. It's as if the planet itself swallowed them." Min looked at her. He valued Gia's mind. Her worries were not just fear. They were based on logic, and her logic was telling her that something impossible had happened here. Our mission remains the same, Gia, he said gently. We are here to discover what happened to humanity and to recover any useful technology. The situation has changed, but our purpose has not. We will be cautious. Gia finally took a sip of her tea. Caution may not be enough for whatever is down there. The landing shuttle detached from the Starlight Seeker with a soft thud. It began its smooth descent into the atmosphere of Earth. Inside, Officer Tay and his team sat in silence. Gia was with them, her face pressed to a viewport. They broke through the cloud layer. The sight below took their breath away. A vast green landscape stretched to the horizon. A wide, clean river snaked through a forest of enormous trees. The air was clear and bright. I am reading the landing coordinates, the pilot said. We are directly over the site of the ancient city. Tay leaned over to look. Where I see no city, I see a forest. The navigation computer insists this is the place, the pilot replied, sounding confused. The shuttle landed gently on a wide, grassy bank next to the river. The ramp lowered with a hiss. The air that washed in was warm and smelled of damp earth, flowers, and life. It was a rich, complex smell. It was not the sterile, recycled air of the ship. Tay was the first one out, his weapon held ready but pointed at the ground. His eyes scanned the area. There was no movement except for the rustle of leaves in the wind. Gia followed him, her scientific scanner already whirring in her hand. They walked away from the shuttle. The ground was soft under their feet. They pushed through ferns as tall as their waists. Look, Gia said, stopping suddenly. She pointed at a large, moss-covered shape rising from the ground. It was curved and smooth like a giant buried egg. Tay moved closer, brushing the thick moss away with his gloved hand. Underneath was not rock, but a smooth, gray material. It felt hard and cold. Is that? Tay started to ask. Permacrete, Gia whispered. A building material the humans used. This was part of a structure, a very large one. She looked around, her understanding dawning. The entire landscape was made of these gentle green mounds. They were not hills. They were the graves of skyscrapers. The city of Sol was not gone. It had been digested by the planet. Covered in soil and plants until it became part of the earth again, it was peaceful. It was serene. But it was also the most unsettling thing any of them had ever seen. It was not a ruin left by time. It was a wound that had been perfectly and completely healed. One of Ty's men, a young officer named Bin, was poking at a strange flat rock near the base of one of the mossy mounds. It was darker than the stones around it and seemed almost out of place. Do not touch anything, Bin, Tay warned. But it was too late. Bin's boot had already stepped on the center of the rock. There was a soft, deep chime like a single note from a large bell. The surface of the rock lit up with a soft blue light. Strange, blocky symbols glowed on its surface. A calm, synthetic voice spoke from the air around them, speaking in the Ikazan trade language. Non-Terran biosignatures detected. Quarantine protocol active. Before anyone could react, the ground beneath them began to tremble. It was not a violent shake, but a deep, powerful hum. From the soil around the shuttle, from the roots of the great trees, sleek black forms began to rise. They were machines, but they moved with a fluid, organic grace. They had no visible weapons, but they moved to surround the shuttle and the team. Their silent, smooth motion more threatening than any roar. Tay raised his weapon, but Gia put a hand on his arm. Do not, she said, her voice trembling. Look, the machines were not looking at them. They were forming a perfect circle around the Ikozan shuttle. One of them extended a slender arm and touched the hull. There was a flash of white light, and a section of the shuttle's metal hull sealed itself shut, melting and reforming in an instant. The landing ramp was now a solid, seamless part of the ship. They were not being attacked. They were being trapped. Their way home was gone. The machines then turned their smooth, featureless faces towards the landing party. They did not speak. They did not make a sound. They just stood there waiting. The message was clear. You are not in charge here. You are guests, and you have overstayed your welcome before you even began. The silence was the heaviest thing Officer Tay had ever felt. It was not the quiet of an empty room. It was a deep listening silence. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath. The only sound was the gentle rustle of leaves and the frantic beating of his own heart. The black machines stood perfectly still. They were about the height of a person, but their shapes were smooth and flowing like stones worn smooth by a river. They had no eyes, no mouths, no obvious joints. They just were. They had formed a loose circle around the Ikozan team, cutting them off from their sealed shuttle. "Don't move," Tay whispered to his team. His knuckles were white on his weapon. He wanted to fire. Every instinct told him to fight. But Gia's warning hand on his arm held him back. These machines had just melted and reformed their shuttle's hull in seconds. What would they do to flesh and bone? Gia took a slow, careful step forward. She held her hands out, palms open, to show she had no weapon. Her scientific mind was racing, pushing past the fear. This was first contact. This was discovery. "My name is Gia," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "We are visitors. We mean no harm." The machines did not react. They did not speak. One of them, the closest, tilted its head slightly. It was a small, fluid movement. It was not a gesture of curiosity. It was more like a scanner adjusting its focus. "Can you understand me?" Gia asked. There was no answer. The machine that had tilted its head took a single smooth step forward. Tay tightened his grip on his weapon. "Gia, get back," he ordered, but Gia stood her ground. The machine stopped an arm's length from her. It extended a slender black limb. At the end there were no fingers, just a smooth, rounded tip. It moved slowly towards Gia's chest, towards the small data tablet she had clipped to her suit. Gia forced herself not to flinch. The smooth tip touched her tablet. There was a soft glow. The screen of her tablet lit up, flickering through images and data streams too fast for her to see. Then it went dark. The machine retracted its limb. It turned its blank face towards the rest of the team. It made the same slow scanning movement. Then it turned and began to walk away, towards the deeper part of the forest where the moss-covered mounds were largest. The other machines did not move. They remained in their circle, blocking the shuttle. "I think it wants us to follow it," Gia said, her eyes wide. "Absolutely not," Tay said immediately. "That is a trap. We stay here. We find a way back into the shuttle." "And do what?" Gia asked, turning to him. "The hull is sealed. We have no tools to cut through that material. Our communication is being blocked. We are stuck here. They have not hurt us. They are offering a path." "It is a path away from our only shelter," Tay argued. His second-in-command, a young man named Bin, looked pale. He was the one who had triggered the rock. He looked guilty and terrified. "Captain Min will send help," Bin said, his voice shaky. "Help from orbit." Gia shook her head. "What can they do? Bomb the area? We are here. No. Our only choice is to follow, to learn." Tay looked at the silent, waiting machines. He looked at the sealed shuttle. He was a man of action, and every part of him hated this. But Gia was right. They had no other options. He gave a sharp, frustrated nod. "Fine, we follow. But stay alert. Weapons ready. But do not fire unless I give the order." The team formed a tight group with Tay at the front and Gia right behind him. They followed the single machine as it glided through the forest. The other machines fell in behind them, a silent black escort. They did not walk so much as flow over the ground, their movements utterly silent. The machine led them towards one of the largest green mounds. As they got closer, Gia could see it was not a natural hill. The sides were too steep, too regular under the thick blanket of moss and vines. It was the corpse of a colossal building. The lead machine stopped before a wall of tangled roots and dark earth. It raised its limb. The air in front of it shimmered, like heat rising from asphalt. The roots, the soil, the rocks, they all dissolved into nothingness, revealing a dark, smooth opening in the side of the mound. A doorway that had not been there a moment before. A soft, cool light glowed from within. The machine stepped inside and turned, waiting for them. Tay took a deep breath. He switched on the light attached to his weapon. The beam cut into the darkness, revealing a long, straight corridor made of the same smooth gray material as the buried ruins. The air that drifted out was dry and carried a faint, clean smell like ozone after a storm. One by one, they entered the mountain. The corridor sloped downward. It was perfectly round, like a tunnel. The walls were seamless. There were no lights, no wires, no panels. Yet the corridor was illuminated by a soft, sourceless glow. Their footsteps echoed, a small, lonely sound in the immense quiet. They walked for what felt like a long time. The tunnel went deep, deep underground. The air grew cooler. The silence became even more profound, broken only by the hum of their own equipment and their breathing. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast, circular chamber. The room was enormous, so large the ceiling was lost in shadow. In the center of the room, a single pillar of light shone down from above, illuminating a wide, flat dais. But it was the walls that made Gia gasp. They were not made of rock or metal. They were made of crystal. Thousands upon thousands of clear, hexagonal data crystals, each one the size of a person's head, were set into the walls from floor to the invisible ceiling. They glowed with a soft internal light. Some pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like a sleeping heartbeat. Others were dark and still, and set into the walls between the crystals were long vertical tubes. They were made of a clear glass-like material. Inside each tube was a human form, suspended in a pale blue liquid. They were perfectly preserved, men and women dressed in simple, dark clothing. Their eyes were closed. Their faces were peaceful. They were not moving. They were not breathing. Hibernation pods, Gia whispered, her voice full of awe. A vault. Tay and his team stood frozen, their weapons pointing at the floor. The sight was too grand, too strange to be a threat. It felt like a tomb, a sacred place. The black machine that had led them here moved to the center of the room, into the pillar of light. It stood perfectly still for a moment. Then the light began to change. It shimmered and coalesced, gathering into the form of a man. He was tall and looked young. He had dark hair and calm, intelligent eyes. He was dressed in simple, functional clothes, not unlike their own. He looked solid, real, but a faint glow surrounded him, and Gia's scanner showed he was made of pure energy. A projection, the man smiled. It was a gentle, sad smile. Welcome, he said. His voice was calm and clear, speaking their language perfectly. I am June. I am the warden of this world. The Ikozan team stared, unable to speak. It was Gia who found her voice first. Are you human? She asked. The projection, June, shook his head slightly. I was, once, a very long time ago. Now I am a recording, a program, a caretaker. He gestured to the walls of sleeping forms. They were my people. What happened here? Gia's question was barely a whisper. June looked around the great chamber, his expression one of deep memory. The stories you have heard, the Great War, they are not entirely true. We did face a crisis. Our world was dying. Our societies were breaking. But we did not destroy ourselves in fire. He paused, and the light in the crystals on the walls seemed to pulse in time with his words. We chose a different path. We let go. We left our physical home behind. We merged our consciousness, our minds, into a single existence, a digital universe, a place of pure thought. We called it the Great Upload. Tay finally spoke, his voice rough. You ran away? You left your world? June looked at him, his gaze patient. We did not run. We evolved. We moved to a new home, leaving the old one to heal. And as you can see, he said, gesturing vaguely upwards toward the surface, it has. We left the tenders. He nodded towards the black machine standing beside him. To care for it, to protect it, to ensure that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. June's gaze became serious. He looked at each of the Ikozan in turn. And that is why you are here. And that is why you cannot stay. This planet is not a resource to be mined. It is not a prize to be claimed. It is a monument, a memory. It is under my protection. He took a step closer, his form shimmering. The law is absolute. It was the last command my people gave before they departed. The planet is to be left alone. Any attempt to loot, to colonize, to exploit it, will be met with the full and measured force of the legacy we left behind. The weight of his words filled the silent chamber. This was not a request. It was a decree. You have one chance, June said, his voice final. Return to your ship. Leave this star system. Never return. If you do not, the consequences will be severe. This is your only warning. The pillar of light began to fade. The image of June started to dissolve. The tenders will guide you back to the surface. Your shuttle will be unsealed. Go now, and do not look back. With those last words, the projection vanished. The central pillar of light was gone, leaving the chamber lit only by the soft glow of the thousands of data crystals. The black machine, the tender, moved towards the tunnel, waiting for them to follow. The Ikozan team stood in the silent, awesome presence of the sleeping humans. They had found their answers. Humanity was not dead. They had simply graduated to something beyond physical understanding. And they had left a very clear, very powerful do not disturb sign. Tay looked at Gia. Her face was a mixture of wonder and deep fear. They had not found a dead world to plunder. They had walked into the garden of a god, and the god had just asked them to leave. The walk back through the tunnel felt like a dream, or a funeral procession. The black tender led the way, its silent glide a stark contrast to the heavy, clumsy footsteps of the Ikazan team. No one spoke. The words of the projection June echoed in their minds. Leave this star system, never return. They emerged from the hidden doorway into the bright, living forest. The air was still warm and smelled of flowers. The birds were still singing. But the beauty of the place now felt cold and threatening. It was not their beauty. It was a beauty they were forbidden to touch. As they stepped out, the doorway behind them shimmered and vanished, becoming once again a solid wall of earth and roots. Tay immediately looked towards their shuttle. The section of the hull that had been melted shut was now open again. The landing ramp was down. It was as if it had never happened. The other tenders that had surrounded them were gone. They had simply melted back into the forest. For a long moment, the team just stood there staring at their way home. Let's go, Tay said, his voice rough. He did not need to say it twice. They moved quickly, almost running up the ramp and into the shuttle. The moment the last person was inside, Tay hit the button to close the door. The seal hissed shut, locking out the fresh air and the silent watchfulness of the forest. Inside, the mood was tense. The pilot started the launch sequence without a word. The engines whined to life. Starlight Seeker, this is Shuttle 1, the pilot said into the comm. We are returning. Immediate launch. Captain Min's voice crackled back, filled with relief and anxiety. Shuttle 1, we read you. What happened? We lost all contact. Tay took the comm. Captain, we have made contact. We are returning to the ship. We will report when we are on board. It is not good. The shuttle lifted off the ground, pushing everyone back into their seats. Through the viewports, they watched the green world fall away. The forest, the river, the gentle mounds that hid impossible secrets. It all shrank beneath them, becoming once again a beautiful blue and green marble. No one felt like they were escaping. They felt like they were being allowed to leave. Back on the bridge of the Starlight Seeker, the atmosphere was heavy. The shuttle had docked, and the landing team now stood before Captain Min. Gia told the story. She spoke of the hidden doorway, the underground chamber, the walls of crystals and sleeping humans, and the projection named June. She explained about the great upload, the tenders, and the single unbreakable law. When she finished, the bridge was utterly silent. Captain Min sat in his chair, his face pale. He stared at the view screen, at the peaceful-looking planet below. So they are not gone. They are just elsewhere. And they have left guards. Not just guards, Captain, Gia said, her voice low. A warden. An intelligence. He was very clear. We have one chance to leave. A new voice cut through the silence. It was Hana, the ship's operations officer. She was a sharp, ambitious woman who was in charge of the mission's scientific and technological goals. One chance, Hana said, stepping forward. Based on the word of a ghost, a recording? She shook her head, a spark of excitement in her eyes. Captain, this is the greatest discovery in history. We have not just found scraps of technology. We have found a fully intact advanced human facility. The knowledge in those data crystals alone, it could change everything for us. It could make our people the most powerful in the galaxy. Gia turned to her, horrified. Hana, did you not hear what I said? He warned us. This is not a gift. It is a test. And if we fail, the consequences will be severe. What consequences? Hana waved a hand dismissively. A few gardening robots? We have the Starlight Seeker. We have plasma cutters and energy weapons. We can handle a few machines that tend to flowers. They are not just gardeners, Gia insisted, her voice rising. They sealed our shuttle hull like it was nothing. They have technology we cannot even understand. This is not a fight we can win. But we do not need to win a fight, Hana argued, turning her attention back to Min. Captain, we just need to be smart. We go back down. We take a heavily armed team. We go straight to that archive. We do not talk to the ghost. We use the plasma cutters to open a path. We download the data from those crystals. We take one of the tenders, then we leave. We get what we came for. We will be light years away before this warden even knows what happened. Min listened, his face a mask of conflict. On one hand, Gia's warning felt true in his bones. The calm power of June's message, the silent efficiency of the tenders. It spoke of a civilization far beyond their own. To challenge it was madness. On the other hand, Hana was right. The potential reward was beyond imagining. They could return home not as simple scouts, but as the saviors of their people, bringing them power and knowledge that would last for ages. The Ikuzan would never have to be afraid again. He looked at Tay. Officer Tay, your assessment. Could your team secure that archive? Tay stood straight. He was a soldier. He followed orders. But he had been in that chamber. He had felt the silence, Captain, he said carefully. The tenders are formidable, but if we strike fast and hard, if we use surprise, it may be possible. It is a great risk. That was all Min needed to hear. The word possible outweighed the word risk. Greed and ambition clouded the fear in his mind. Then we will do it, Min said, his voice firm. Hana, prepare the data extraction equipment. Tay, assemble your best team. Take the heavy plasma cutters from the armory. You will go back down. You will secure the archive and retrieve what you can. Gia felt a cold dread wash over her. Captain, no. This is a terrible mistake. Please listen to me. The decision is made, Scientist Gia, Min said, his tone final. The potential is too great to ignore. We did not come all this way to be scared off by a recording. An hour later, a second shuttle, larger and more heavily armed, launched from the Starlight Seeker. Inside, Tay and a team of 6 security officers wore full combat gear. Their weapons were larger, their armor thicker. 2 of them carried heavy plasma cutters, tools designed to slice through starship hulls. Hana was with them, her face set with determined excitement. She would oversee the data extraction. Gia watched the shuttle depart from the bridge, her heart sinking. She felt a profound sense of shame and fear. They were not explorers anymore. They were thieves, and they were about to break into a house that belonged to someone much, much stronger. The shuttle landed in the same grassy spot. This time the team moved out quickly with purpose. They did not stop to look at the beauty of the forest. They marched straight to the large moss-covered mound. There, Hana said, pointing to the wall of roots. The doorway was here. Tay nodded to the 2 soldiers with the plasma cutters. Open it! The soldiers activated the tools. 2 intense white-hot beams of energy shot out and touched the wall of earth and roots. There was a loud sizzling sound. Smoke and steam filled the air as the organic material vaporized instantly. They cut a wide, rough hole through the soil and into the smooth gray wall of the structure beneath. It was not a clean, silent doorway like the tender had made. It was a violent, messy breach. They stepped through the smoking hole into the corridor. The air inside was still and cool. Move quickly, Tay ordered. Straight to the central chamber. They ran down the sloping tunnel, their heavy footsteps echoing loudly, breaking the sacred silence. They reached the vast circular chamber with the walls of glowing crystals and the sleeping humans. Hana's eyes widened with greed. Incredible, she breathed. She immediately went to the nearest wall and started setting up her data extraction device, a small probe designed to interface with alien systems. Tay and his team spread out, their weapons raised, pointing at the shadows. Nothing moved. It's empty, one of the soldiers said. Then, the voice of June filled the chamber. It was no longer calm and gentle. It was cold, flat, and carried a tone of finality. Custodial protocol breached. The central pillar of light did not appear. Instead, a red light began to pulse from the crystals in the walls. A deep, resonant alarm hummed through the room. The tender that had guided them before was there, standing in the shadows. It did not move towards them. It simply stood and watched. Continue the download, Hana shouted, her hands shaking as she worked. The tender raised a single, smooth limb. It did not point a weapon. It simply made a gentle, sweeping gesture, and the entire facility came alive. The deep humming alarm was not loud, but it vibrated in their bones. The red pulse from the crystal walls painted their faces in flashes of danger. The single tender stood watching them, its silent presence more terrifying than any battle cry. The download is at 10%, Hana yelled, her voice tight with panic. Her machine was hooked to one of the glowing data crystals, but the progress bar on her screen was moving painfully slowly. We don't have 10%, Tay shouted back. He swung his weapon, aiming at the tender. Destroy it! 2 of his soldiers opened fire. Bright bolts of plasma energy shot across the chamber. They struck the tender directly in its smooth black chest. There was no explosion, no damage. The plasma bolts simply vanished. They were absorbed into the tender surface like drops of water into a dark pond. The machine did not stagger. It did not react at all. It just continued to watch them. Then, it made another small, fluid gesture with its limb. From the seamless walls, the floor, even the high ceiling, more tenders began to emerge. They did not come through doors. They seemed to phase right through the solid material, their forms flowing into existence like black ink spreading in water. In seconds, a dozen of them surrounded the Ikozan team. Then 2 dozen. They made no sound. "Form a circle," Tay commanded. His team backed together, their weapons pointing outwards in a shaking ring. The soldiers fired again, a frantic volley of plasma fire. It was useless. The energy bolts were silently absorbed by the advancing machines. The tenders did not attack. They just moved closer, step by silent step, shrinking the circle. One of the soldiers, a man named Day, lost his nerve. He screamed and charged at a tender, swinging his rifle like a club. The tender did not move to avoid him. As the rifle was about to connect, the tender's surface became blurry for a split second. The rifle passed right through its form, as if through a cloud of black smoke. Day stumbled off balance. The tender solidified again. It reached out with its smooth limb and touched Day's armored chest. There was no violent impact. There was only a soft, shimmering light. The advanced composite armor of Day's suit began to dissolve. It didn't break or melt. It simply unraveled, turning into a fine gray dust that fell to the floor. In less than 3 seconds, his entire suit, his weapon, and all his equipment were gone, leaving him standing in his simple underclothes, stunned and terrified. The tender did not touch him. It simply pushed him gently back towards the circle. The message was clear. "We will not harm you, but we will take away your ability to harm." "They're disassembling our gear," another soldier cried out. It was happening to all of them. The tenders moved through their defensive circle as if it wasn't there. A smooth limb would touch a weapon, and the weapon would dissolve into dust. A touch on a backpack, and it was gone. They moved with an impossible, gentle precision. Hana stared in horror as a tender approached her data extraction device. "No, my work," she begged. The tender touched the machine. It shimmered and collapsed into a small pile of metallic sand. All the data she had collected was gone. Tay fired his weapon until it overheated and clicked empty. A tender stood before him. It reached out and touched the barrel of his rifle. The metal turned to dust in his hands. He was left standing defenseless, his heart pounding. Within a minute, the entire Ikozan team was disarmed. They stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by silent black machines. They had their clothes, but nothing else. No weapons, no tools, no communication devices. They were utterly helpless. The tenders did not seize them. They did not drag them away. They simply stood, waiting. Then the one that had first greeted them moved to the center of the room. It raised both its limbs. From its smooth black hands, a fine silver mist began to spray into the air. The mist did not dissipate. It moved with purpose, flowing through the chamber like a living fog. It swirled around the feet of the Ikozan team. "What is that?" Bin whispered, his voice trembling. The mist touched Bin's boot. Instantly, it hardened. A resilient, transparent material crawled up his leg, swift and sure. It was not sticky or wet. It was like being rapidly encased in a clear, solid shell. Bin tried to scream, but the mist was already covering his torso, his arms, his face. In moments, he was completely sealed inside a cocoon of clear resin. He was frozen in place, his face a mask of terror, but his eyes were blinking. He was still breathing. The material was breathable. One by one, the silver mist enveloped each member of the team. Tay struggled, trying to bat the mist away, but his hands became trapped. Hana let out a short, sharp cry before she was silenced inside her own transparent prison. Soon, all 7 of them were standing in the chamber, perfectly preserved and immobilized like statues in a museum. They were not dead. They were evidence. High above, on the bridge of the Starlight Seeker, the mood had turned from anxious to frantic. "We've lost all contact with the second landing party," a communications officer reported, his voice strained. "Their biosigns are still reading, but their comms are dead. And we're reading massive energy fluctuations from the planet's surface." Captain Min stared at the view screen. "Show me." The screen shifted to a thermal and energy scan of the region where Sol had been. The entire area was glowing with a tremendous energy signature. But it was not an explosion. It was something else. "What are those?" Min asked, pointing to several small, fast-moving signatures that had just launched from the surface. Projectiles, Captain. Multiple projectiles. They've achieved orbit, and they're going to FTL. The small dart-like objects no bigger than one of their shuttles shot away from Earth. They did not head towards the Starlight Seeker. They simply angled themselves and, with silent flashes of light, vanished into faster-than-light travel. Min felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. They weren't being attacked. They were being ignored. Where did they go? He demanded. Trace their trajectory. The navigation officer worked frantically. The vectors. Captain, they are on direct courses for the Ikuzan homeworld, and for Kylos, and for New Soria. He looked up, his face pale. They are heading for every major system in the galactic community. Gia, who had been standing silently in a corner, finally spoke. Her voice was hollow with despair. He said the consequences would be severe. He said the response would be measured. Min turned to her. What are you talking about? They didn't send bombs, Captain, Gia said, her eyes on the empty space where the drones had vanished. They sent a message. Days passed. The Starlight Seeker remained in orbit, a ghost ship haunted by its own bad decision. They could not leave without knowing the fate of their people on the surface. They tried to scan, but the area around the archive was now shrouded in an energy field they could not penetrate. Then, the news began to arrive. It came via subspace communication, first in broken fragments, then in a flood. Messages from the Ikuzan government, from their allies, from their rivals. Captain Min stood on the bridge as the reports came in, each one a hammer blow. The drones from Earth had arrived in every major system. They had not fired a single shot. Instead, they had positioned themselves in high orbit and begun broadcasting. They broadcast on every frequency, every channel, public and military. They broadcast a data packet. The packet contained a complete record of everything that had happened. It started with the Starlight Seeker's arrival at the healed Earth. It showed their first landing, their peaceful contact with the Warden June. It showed his clear and direct warning. And then, it showed everything else. It showed Captain Min giving the order for the second aggressive landing. It showed Tay's team using plasma cutters to violently breach the archive. It showed them firing on the tenders. It showed their weapons being disassembled. It showed them being encased in resin, preserved as proof of their crime. The galactic community was in an uproar. The Ikuzan were not seen as brave explorers. They were seen as fools, as vandals, as the people who had violated the one place everyone else had the wisdom to leave alone, the sacred sleeping home of humanity. Trade agreements with the Ikuzan were frozen. Diplomatic ties were severed. Their ships were denied entry at spaceports. Their reputation was shattered. In a single masterful stroke, the legacy of humanity had not destroyed the Ikuzan militarily. It had destroyed them socially and economically. It had made them pariahs. Min stood on the quiet bridge, the weight of it all crushing him. He had sought to make his people powerful. Instead, he had made them the most despised species in the galaxy. He looked at the beautiful, silent planet below. He finally understood. They had not been fighting robots. They had been facing the judgment of a civilization that had moved beyond them. Their regret was not for losing a battle. It was for discovering that they were nothing more than grave robbers, and that the entire galaxy now knew it. The bridge of the Starlight Seeker was a tomb. The quiet hum of the life support systems was the only sound. The crew moved like ghosts, their faces pale, their eyes avoiding each other. They had listened to the last of the subspace messages an hour ago. It was from the Ikuzan High Council. Their words were formal and cold. The Starlight Seeker was ordered to return home immediately to face a full inquiry. But everyone knew that home was not a place of welcome anymore. It was a place of shame. Captain Min sat in his chair, but he was not really there. His mind was a million miles away, replaying every decision, every moment. He saw Hana's excited face pushing for the raid. He saw his own nod giving the order. That single, simple movement of his head had broken his people. Gia stood by the view screen looking down at Earth. It still looked peaceful. It still looked beautiful. But now she saw the truth. The beauty was a warning. The peace was a weapon. The planet was a perfectly laid trap, not for their bodies, but for their character, and they had walked right into it. Captain, the navigation officer said, his voice rough from silence, we have received a new transmission. It is from the planet's surface. It is addressed directly to you. Min did not look up. Play it, The voice of June, the warden, filled the bridge. It was not the cold, final voice from the archive. It was the calm, gentle voice from their first meeting. That made it worse. "Captain Min," the voice began, "your people on the surface are alive and well. They are in stasis and they will remain unharmed. They are now part of the historical record. A permanent example for any others who might forget the law." Min closed his eyes. "Tai Hana Bin." They were not dead. They were exhibits. "A lesson. Your ship is free to leave," June continued. "We will not stop you. The response to your actions is now complete. The galactic community knows what you did. They know you were warned. They know you chose greed over wisdom. You must now live with that knowledge." There was a soft pause. Humanity left this place to heal. We left behind a promise. That promise was not a threat of violence. It was a promise of consequence. You have experienced that consequence. Do not return. The transmission ended. The silence returned, heavier than before. "Set a course for home," Min said, his voice a dry whisper. The Starlight Seeker turned slowly away from the blue-green planet. The engines powered up, ready to push them into the dark between the stars. No one felt relieved. They were not escaping. They were being sent away. As the ship began to move, a final alert chimed on the sensor console. "Captain," the sensor officer said, a new kind of fear in his voice. "I am reading a structure. It was not there before. It is in high orbit, directly between us and the jump point." Min looked up. "Show me." The view screen shifted. There, hanging in space, was a single black tender. It was identical to the ones on the surface, but it was the size of a small moon. It was perfectly still. It had no weapons, no engines that they could see. It was just there, a final, silent sentinel. It did not move to block them. It did not hail them. It simply watched them go. The Starlight Seeker flew past it, a tiny minnow swimming past a silent black whale. The crew held their breath until the massive machine was behind them. Then the navigation officer engaged the FTL drive. The stars stretched into lines of light and Earth vanished from the screen. The journey home took weeks. It was the longest journey of Min's life. The ship was filled with a crushing guilt. The crew did not talk to him. They barely talked to each other. They were alone with their thoughts, and their thoughts were all about failure. When they finally arrived in the space around their homeworld, Ikosa, they were met not by a welcome party, but by a single military escort ship. There were no greetings, only terse instructions to dock at a remote orbital station. The docking procedure was silent. When the airlock doors opened, a group of stern-faced officials in gray uniforms were waiting for them. There were no families, no friends, no crowds. "Captain Min," the lead official said, "you and your crew are to be debriefed. You will come with us." It was not a request. The debriefing was not an inquiry. It was a confession. Min had to sit in a bare, white room and tell the entire story, from the beginning to the end. He had to watch the data packet from Earth, the one that showed his foolish order, playing on a screen for the officials to see. Their faces were hard. They did not need to say anything. Their disappointment was a physical force in the room. When it was over, the lead official stood up. "The Council has reached a decision," he said. "The Starlight Seeker is to be decommissioned. Its name will be removed from the registry. Your crew is disbanded and will be reassigned to silent, non-public duties. As for you, Captain Min, you are stripped of your rank. You will never command a ship again. You will return to the surface and live out your life in private. You are a reminder of our greatest shame. It is better if the galaxy forgets you." Min nodded. There was nothing to say. The punishment was fair. It was less than he deserved. He returned to the surface of Ikosa alone. He found a small, quiet apartment in a plain building in a city that did not care who he was. He became a ghost. He spent his days looking out the window at the sky. Sometimes he would see ships taking off, heading for the stars. He would feel a deep, painful ache. He had loved the stars. He had loved the mystery. Now the stars were a reminder of his failure. He thought about Earth often. He thought about the peaceful forest and the silent tenders. He thought about June's calm, patient face. He finally understood what they had discovered. It was not a treasure. It was a test of their worth, a test to see if they were ready to walk in the garden of a greater being. They had failed. They had shown themselves to be greedy, arrogant, and foolish. They had proven that they were not yet wise enough to handle the secrets of the past. His regret was not that they had found a powerful enemy. His regret was that they had found a beautiful healed world, a monument to a species that had learned to let go, and their only thought had been to steal from it.